when Emily Backmeda and Russell Lakedrick, residents of one of the islands from Tall and Bon, heard a heart-rending scream. Their house was the only one on the beach, and the tiny island was a calm and quiet place. So they ran out to see what had happened. In front of them on the beach stood a bearded man in torn underwear. That's how Emmy remembers it. He was waving his arms and yelling in an incomprehensible language. He had a knife in his hand. We made it clear with gestures that he lowered his weapon. The alien threw the knife to the ground and, continuing to shout something, fell to his knees. As we got closer, we saw a broken wooden boat. We realized that this man had washed ashore. He lay on the ground almost exhausted, and repeated obviously his name, Jose, Jose. And the good-natured islanders brought this creepy guest into their house, gave him water, gave him clean clothes, and started cooking. At the same time, the alien was constantly muttering something, obviously in Spanish, which the locals did not understand. That's how Russell remembers it. When we brought the pancakes, he attacked the food like a wild animal. Without raising his head, he devoured the food, and it was truly a terrifying sight. And when the stranger was full, it became absolutely unclear what to do with him next. After all, there was a half-naked bearded man sitting at their house, who was muttering something in an unknown language. The couple offered him a piece of paper and a pen to write down what happened to him, which he gladly did. He writes a letter, obviously in Spanish, which, as I said, the locals did not understand. A married couple gives this letter to a local boy, who delivers it on a bicycle to the mayor of this atoll. However, on this tiny island, with an area of less than 6 square kilometers, none of the locals spoke Spanish. An anthropology student from Norway, who knew a few words, helped. And as a result, the mayor of the island, the police, doctors, and a student translator stay with this strange man. And he tells them that his name is Jose Alvarenga, and he is 37 years old. He worked as a fisherman in a village on the west coast of Mexico, but his boat got caught in a storm, and he was swept into the open ocean. And it would seem that this is the usual story of a distressed fisherman. But there was one catch. The coast of Mexico was 10,000 kilometers from the Marshall Islands, where our bearded guest was now. And of course, this story looked incredible and caused a lot of doubts. And the island's police even take this strange man into custody and interrogate him through an interpreter. Here's what he told them. We went out into the ocean at dawn, and were going to spend no more than 2 days there. But by the evening, the boat had gone far enough from the shore, and the weather began to deteriorate. We decided to go back, but the engine wouldn't start. I was trying to fix it, and the waves kept increasing, and then it started raining. The boat was tossed from side to side. The only thing we could do was wait for the weather to calm down. When the storm passed, we realized that we were in the open ocean, and do not know where exactly. Of the food, we had only a few sandwiches and a couple of bottles of water. There were no oars either. We were hoping that some ship would pass by, but the days passed, food and water ran out. We managed to catch some fish and seabirds. This hunger was so unbearable that Eskil and I attacked the raw meat and ate it. Eskil immediately threw up. Everything was fine with me. I continued to eat raw meat. Since we didn't know if we would be able to catch anything else in the near future, we had to save food. The meat quickly rotted in the sun. Eskil hardly ate raw meat and often refused to eat at all. His stomach could not digest such food. He believed that they would find us soon. And perhaps he believed in it even more than I did. I tried to make him hold his nose and eat at least a few pieces. But as soon as the food got into his mouth, he immediately threw up. Eskil looked worse every day. He slept a lot. One day I just didn't open my eyes. Yes, I pushed him overboard. What else could I do? Fishing was very difficult. She was almost never seen. I fed on seabirds that boarded the boat. But somehow after the bird I felt sick, and then stomach problems started. I couldn't go to the toilet. It was just awful. But then I got a sea turtle, and by eating its meat, I got rid of this problem. It turned out that turtle meat helps digestion. Then I realized that I needed to eat this meat. When it rained, water collected at the bottom of the boat. And he drank this water using a turtle shell instead of a cup. There was a time when the weather was sunny and dry for a long time. It was the hardest time. I had to force myself to drink my own urine. I held my nose and just drank. And sometimes I had to drink the blood of turtles. It was hard to bear the heat. The sun was blinding, shining directly into my eyes. I was hiding from him in a fish storage box. I lost track of time almost immediately. One day flowed into another. I thought I was going to go crazy. I don't remember much about the days in the ocean. I don't even remember how many turtles I ate during this time. One day I saw a ship. He was walking so close that I could even see his crew standing on the deck. I got to my feet, shouted, and waved my arms. The crew waved back, but the ship passed by. And a few days later, I woke up to the fact that the boat was rocking violently. I decided that a storm had started. However, when I opened my eyes, I saw that I almost crashed into another ship. But it was too late. The ship passed by, and probably didn't notice me. After meeting with the courts, my hope was strengthened. I thought there must be land somewhere nearby. I really wanted to believe it. I slept a lot and had dreams. But not about home or even about loved ones, but only about food. I imagined that the boat was filled with my favorite tortillas, chicken, and other dishes. I remember my parents baking bread as a child. His scent. I felt it then in a dream. But I opened my eyes, and there was only the sky, the sun, and the sea around. I was thinking about my family. In the ocean, I realized how much I want to be close to my family. With my daughter Fatima, with my mother, and with my father. I imagined meeting them, hugging them, and never parting again. I think my faith in God saved me. I knew that He was beside me and guarding me. There were times when I thought of ending it all. But I was scared. I couldn't. Crying, screaming, angry at himself. But I couldn't. Then he calmed down, raised his hands up and screamed, "God, I believe." I was always sure that He would hear me and save me. So, from the confused story of the fisherman, it turned out that he, Jose Alvarenga, and his partner Escal Cordoba, left the village of Costa, all in southern Mexico, on November 17, 2012. About a day after the start of their fishing, the boat's motor breaks down, and then they get into a serious storm. That takes them far from the shore, without means of communication, navigation, a working motor, and even oars. They are left to drift in the middle of the open ocean. Probably, the boat was picked up by the northern landing current, the average speed of which is 12 miles per day. The distance from the village of Costa Azul to the Marshall Islands, where Jose was discovered, is about 10,000 kilometers. Thus, the fisherman had to be in the ocean for about 470 days. Alvarenga claimed to have spent 440 days in the Pacific Ocean. So, his story may well be true. And now let's go back to the island where the strange bearded man was discovered. The situation was complicated. It was complicated by the language barrier, as well as the fact that obviously the fisherman was not himself. And it was unclear where he was telling the truth and where he was fantasizing. In addition, he obviously had partial memory loss. Or maybe he just didn't want to remember some unpleasant moments for him. The locals treated him with wariness and suspicion. And even when Jose asked for a phone number in order to contact his family, he was denied this request. This is how the mayor of this island remembers it. This story seemed very suspicious to us. We knew practically nothing about this man. We heard all the information only from his mouth. So we decided to send Jose to Majura, the capital of the Marshall Islands. A day later, Jose was put on a patrol vessel. All 22 hours of sailing, Alvarenga did not leave the hold of the boat. He said he just couldn't look at the water anymore. It was difficult to talk to him. He was constantly eating. He could not tear himself away from bananas and coconuts that the residents of Tal and Bon had collected for him on the road. When we finally docked and started down the ramp, he seemed to be in a state of euphoria. Cheerful, contented, quite well-fed, Jose aroused a lot of suspicion. He looked too good for a man who had been drifting in the ocean for more than a year. And it's hard to argue with that. If you look at the photos of Alvarenga immediately after the rescue, then he looks little like a man who has been eating seagulls and turtles for more than a year. Hanging cheeks, second chin. Rather, he looks like a man on the verge of excess weight, rather than a starving Robinson. And, of course, Jose was taken to the hospital. A couple of hours later, after conducting an examination and taking tests, the doctors stated that Jose did not need urgent hospitalization. He was found to have severe dehydration, partial memory loss, and problems with the spine, which, however, could have been before this case. However, the fisherman certainly did not die of hunger. Here's how the chief physician of the local hospital, Kenan Bryan, comments on it. Despite periodically recurring bouts of deterioration of health, Jose is on the mend. And yet, I cannot confirm with certainty that this man has been in the ocean for more than 14 months. In 1992, a boat with castaways washed up to the Marshall Islands. We provided medical care. So they drifted in the ocean for 6 months, and were carried out of the boat on a stretcher. And as you have already understood, Jose Alvarenga did not need a stretcher, and looked quite cheerful, which caused even more suspicion. He was kept under supervision for a long time, so to speak, and was allowed to make a phone call to Mexico, only a few months later. In the presence of the authorities, he dialed the phone number, but called not to Mexico, but to El Salvador. As it turned out that the fisherman was from there. Why Jose didn't report this earlier, we can only guess. And the journalists who, as you know, really liked this story, quickly found Alvarenga's mother, whose name was Maria. The woman gave such a comment. Jose. He left us for Mexico almost 15 years ago. At first, he regularly called, sent photos. But the last time we heard from him, 8 years ago. Then he disappeared. We didn't have the money to go looking. And where to look? Everyone assumed he was dead. But I knew my son was alive. In addition to his parents, Jose had another 14-year-old daughter, whose name was Fatima. The father did not wait for her birth and left ostensibly to work. The girl had never seen him, but only occasionally talked to him on the phone. But at least his relatives confirmed his identity. That was something. We knew that this man was really Jose Alvarenga, and the journalists began to dig. Then the investigation moved, of course, to Mexico, where, according to him, he worked as a fisherman. And the Mexican side reported that on November 17, 2012, 2 fishermen really disappeared in the village of Costa Azul in the state of Chiapas. Due to weather conditions, the search was stopped 2 days later. The police report listed the seeds of the missing: Escal Cordoba and Cirilo Vargas. There was no Jose Alvarenga there. And as it turned out, Jose Alvarenga lived in Mexico illegally, using forged documents under the name Vargas. Fisherman Bellarmine Solis, the head of the same artel where Jose worked, recognized him from the photo and made the following comment. His face, of course, did not lose weight at all, but he himself was decently deflated. We are glad that he is healthy and we are waiting for his return. And this story, which at first seemed to everyone to be utter nonsense, gradually began to resemble the truth. In addition, Jose Alvarenga's memory began to return. He began to recall more and more new details, more and more new witnesses to this story began to appear. And here is the most detailed story that I managed to collect from the words of Jose Alvarenga and the people involved in this story. In November 2012 year, a fisherman named Salvador Alvarenga made a fateful decision to ignore the warning about bad weather and decides to go to sea on his 8-meter fiberglass boat. Excessive fishing has destroyed the population along the coast of Mexico, so in search of a good catch, fishermen sometimes have to go to sea up to 200 kilometers away, and sometimes even further. Fishermen from the village of Costa Azul usually leave for a 60-hour shift and can return with a good catch of tuna, marlin, shark and other fish. For such a shift, they can get $250, which in the case of Alvarenga, would have been spent mainly on booze and illegal substances. Alvarenga was a partygoer known for his generosity and debauchery. On that fateful day, his usual fishing partner was busy. Therefore, he takes with him an inexperienced 22-year-old fisherman, Escal Cordova. Jose took with him a change of clothes and some food. Fried liver, rice, lime. So, to have a snack on the road. Alvarenga and Cordova went out on a primitive fishing boat. From the equipment on which there was only a box filled with ice for storing fish, 3 knives of different lengths for processing fish, 3 cans of gasoline, a walkie-talkie, GPS, a sheet to cover themselves at night, and 3 empty cans of bleach. That served as buoys for fishermen. And fishing was more than successful. In a short time, they caught an 80-kilogram hammerhead shark and half a ton of other fish. It was a great catch. And having filled the boat with fish, about 70 kilometers from the shore, they turned off the engine and lay down to rest, intending to return to Costa Ossel with the first rays of the sun. But suddenly an ocean storm came. Alvarenga recalls that first there was thunder and a cold smell, and then an unpredictable north wind blew, which the locals call El Norte. This wind took the lives of many local fishermen. Alvarenga recalls that the sea seemed to have turned into a boiling cauldron. The boat quickly filled with water, but Jose, like an experienced fisherman, remained calm and began to slowly return to shore. That's how he remembers it. When the storm hit, Escal froze in panic. He cried and cried, curled up in a ball, covered his head with his hands, and continued to cry. I persuaded him to help, to throw the catch overboard, to reduce the weight of the boat. But he couldn't. So I had to do everything myself. And after a while, it seemed, the storm began to subside a little, the fog cleared, and the fishermen saw the coastline of Mexico, which was only 2 hours away. They tried to start the engine, but it won't start. And it will never start again. They try to call for help on the radio and contact their superiors. That's how Jose remembers it. I shouted into the radio, "Willie, Willie, Willie, the engine is damaged." He asked for my GPS coordinates, but the GPS didn't work. Willie ordered us to anchor, but we didn't have an anchor. I thought I wouldn't need an anchor on a deep-sea fishing trip. Willie replied that they were already coming for us. And I shouted to him to hurry up, and a couple of words without cases. And these were the last words we heard from the fishermen. The storm continued for the next 16 days and carried the boat 500 kilometers from Mexico. It became clear that even if they were searched for, they would not be found at such a distance. At the same time, they lost some of their equipment during the storm. This is how Jose remembers it. We lost everything except the smallest knife, my diving masks, bleach bottles, in which I then collected rainwater, and the refrigerator drawer where we usually put the caught fish. Now it served me as protection from the sun during the day and protection from the cold and wind at night. The radio and GPS are all gone. The engine broke down. I instinctively realized that we had gone too far from Earth to have any chance of being discovered. I have never known such silence and such emptiness. In all directions, no matter where I looked, there was nothing but water. For the first few days, Jose Alvarenga and Escal Cordova did not eat anything, but only drank rainwater. They were in shock, but still hoped for a quick rescue, that a ship was about to come, and they would be saved. However, salvation was not in sight, and hunger was felt more and more clearly. Here's what Jose tells me. I was so hungry that I ate my nails, swallowing all the little pieces. And I caught small fish with my hands, and even jellyfish, swallowing them whole. They burned my larynx, but that didn't interest me anymore. However, hunger forced them to be inventive. Soon they got the hang of catching bigger fish, which they ate raw. Sometimes they managed to catch a sea turtle, and it gave a large supply of meat, and sometimes even a seagull, which sat down on board their boat. When it rained, they collected rainwater from the bottom of the boat into bleach cans, and thus had a small supply of water. However, she was missing all the time. And as we understand it, Jose Alvarenga has entered, so to speak, into a fight for life. However, as we remember, he was not alone. With him was a young fisherman, Escal Cordova. What happened to him? In fact, there is quite a dark story here. When questioned, Jose said that his partner would not have survived anyway, and his death was only a matter of time. And, according to Jose, during the first month, Eskel tried his best. He entered into fleeting conversations, confessed to Jose that he had a girlfriend, with whom he had a difficult relationship for his drunkenness. He also said she was pregnant. According to Jose, the trouble was that Eskel refused to eat. He couldn't eat raw fish, he was immediately sick. That's how he remembers it. I cut the fish into small pieces and fed him like a little baby. But there came a moment when he completely stopped drinking and eating. He started saying crazy things. For example, he asked me to go buy him food at the grocery store. He looked at the sea and said, "Look, there's a shop over there selling fresh mangoes and tortillas. You'll have to go and buy some for us." After 4 months of their drift, Eskel Cordova dies. According to Jose, one day he just didn't wake up. And, as Jose later told, Eskel, the day before he left, in a fit of madness, begged him not to eat his body after death. And Alvarenga made him such a promise. Jose says that he laid his body on the bow of the boat and sailed in this way for 6 days. Sometimes he even talked calmly until the body began to decompose in the sun, so that he was forced to push it overboard. And this is actually a very important point that will cause a lot of controversy later. Alvarenga was left alone. He continued his extremely long struggle for life. He soon learned to get his own food very deftly. He caught sea turtles and even tried to make improvised oars out of their shells. But I soon realized that it was useless to row them. From the shell of a turtle, he also made himself a sun hat. He learned to catch seabirds boarding a boat with his bare hands, and ate them whole with feathers and claws, which caused his intestines to become clogged, and he began to suffer from constipation. According to him, this continued until he discovered that the shark's liver was an excellent laxative. And in this fight, Jose Alvarenga did not disdain anything. Fish eyeballs have become a delicacy for him. They were rich in vitamin C, and according to him, he ate them with an incredible appetite. The fishing boat that became his home was of an open type. In order not to overheat in the sun, Jeroen waited in the fish box. He also slept there at night so as not to freeze in the wind. To maintain discipline, Jose followed the daily routine. I ate 3 times a day, and spent the rest of my time hunting, collecting rainwater, singing my favorite songs, and praying. One day something suddenly hit the side of the boat. Looking overboard, Jose saw a huge creature. This is how he remembers this meeting. He accompanied the boat for 15 days. He became my friend, and I gave him a name. I named him for some reason. Telio. Sometimes I would lean overboard to stroke him. I imagined myself riding ashore on his back, or being carried to safety in his belly, like Jonah from the Bible. But he left, and I was left alone again. And according to Jose, he was very afraid of falling overboard of the boat, as there were a lot of sharks around. However, even from this problem, he managed to benefit. Fleeing from predators, fish and squid sometimes jumped right on board the boat, supplying the fishermen with food. After a few months of this drift, Jose's mind became clouded. Here's what he says: "I pressed a 6-inch blade to my neck, hard enough to feel the pressure. I heard the devil's voice saying, 'Go on. Just do it. Why are you suffering? Stop it now.' Then another voice spoke to me. He told me that I had to survive, to tell the world this story, and that God exists, and that He is stronger than the devil. And then I dropped the knife. There were times when I felt like my head was about to explode, because she was full of black thoughts. It was as if my temples were being held tightly in a vice, and all I could do was pray that these thoughts would stop." You see, the battle between God and the devil was constantly raging in my mind. And as a result, Jose creates a kind of fantastic country in his head, where he enjoyed the best dishes, communicated with relatives, and finally, met with his daughter, whom he abandoned 14 years ago and never saw. This alternate reality became so vivid for him that he rarely came out of this state. And one day his clouded mind gave him a creepy idea for entertainment. Using the seabirds he caught for food, he invented a bizarre and creepy game. He called it seagull football. Here's what he says about it. I realized that the best way to catch birds is to sneak up on them quietly and slowly, so as not to scare them, and then suddenly catch them by the legs. Then I tore off their wings so they couldn't fly away, and left them alive for a few days to keep the meat fresh. And it is very difficult for a person who is in comfort to imagine this terrible and bloody process. When Jose tore off their wings, the birds screamed and pecked at his hands. They are forever deeply scarred. So here's what Jose says about his crazy game. Sometimes I held 8 or 10 birds at a time, and they all jumped madly on the boat. And one day I had an idea for a game. I caught a round fish, one of those that can inflate like a balloon. I inflated it and dried it in the sun. Then I put her between the seabirds, and they started chasing her, kicking her like it was a soccer ball. I have always loved football, and named every bird after one of my favorite players, Messi, Maradona, Pelé. Then he divided them into 2 teams and put a large turtle shell on each end of the boat. And they became the gate. Sometimes I played this game for hours, commenting on the match. However, despite his mental problems, Jose still hoped for salvation, and spent hours peering at the horizon, in the hope of seeing a ship. And finally, he was lucky. He saw a large ship, and even managed to see the crew on the deck of the ship. Jose rips off his torn shirt, and starts waving it in the air to attract attention. The people on deck waved back at him. They had clearly noticed him. However, the ship passes by and does not save the fisherman. That's how Jose remembers it. I was hysterical. I shouted, "Come back, you fools, you stupid cowards. Come back." Then he fell to his knees, beat the boat with his fists, and cried. And finally, after 438 days and 10,000 kilometers of drift, his battered boat washes ashore from Tal and Bon, one of the Marshall Islands. It was the 30th of January, 2014. He went ashore, cried, shouted, and thanked God. It was to these cries that the married couple of islanders Emily Buckmet and Russell Ligdrick came. This story had an incredible resonance and became one of the longest cases of survival at sea. But it also caused a lot of doubts and criticism. And indeed, there are a lot of white spots in the history of Jose Alvarenga. He recalled this story as if gradually, referring to partial amnesia, he painted more and more new details. Or invented more and more new details. Again, his appearance after the miraculous rescue also raised a lot of questions. I have already mentioned the hanging cheeks, the second chin. Well, the man didn't look like someone who had been on a diet of fish and seagulls for a year and a half. And I remind you that when Alvarenga was taken to the hospital, the doctors also said that he did not need hospitalization. Yes, he was slightly dehydrated, but quite healthy. And that's after spending more than a year in the ocean. The fisherman also had no signs of scurvy, which mowed down sailors with a more varied diet. But he had not had a source of vitamin C for 438 days, except for the minimum amount contained in the blood of fish and turtles. The story of partial insanity, which Jose pressed at the beginning, was also not confirmed by psychologists and psychiatrists. According to their conclusion, he was quite sane and mentally healthy. And this story caused a lot of doubts already at the initial stages. The first assumption was that Jose was simply not the most successful fisherman, leading a wild lifestyle, who decided to arrange a kind of sensation in order to sell it more expensive and get some benefit for himself. And indeed, very soon Jose's sanity returned. He began to speak quite coherently, willingly gave interviews to journalists, and eventually sold his story to journalist and writer Jonathan Franklin, who published the book 438 Days at Sea. An amazing story about the victory of man over the elements. And the once poor fisherman Jose Alvarenga is rapidly gaining popularity. Journalists really like this story. They are happy to promote it, interview him, arrange a meeting with his parents, whom he has not seen for 8 years. They organize a meeting with their daughter, whom they have never seen in 14 years. And Jose is constantly flashing in the media headlines. But in fairness, not only fame fell on Jose, but also a sufficient portion of criticism. And in the end, he even agrees to take a lie detector test. And that's what his lawyer said. At the end of a series of assessments, it was found that the arguments put forward by Mr. Jose Salvador Alvarenga regarding the events that occurred from the moment of his disappearance to the moment of his discovery were verified and fully correspond to reality. In other words, everything that the fisherman said, based on the lie detector readings, was presumably true. And the accusations did not end there. The story of the disappearance of his partner Escal Cordoba also raised a lot of questions. Jose told this story in a very confused way. He was confused in his testimony, and there were a lot of white spots. And many assumed that he did not throw him overboard as he claimed, but fed on his body for a long time. Which is why he was rescued in such a well-fed form. This version is also held by the Cordoba family, which, by the way, filed a $1 million lawsuit against Has. Why did Alvarenga say that they were just jealous of his success and wanted to get some of the money from the sale of this story and the book? And how did this whole story end? But in fact, nothing. Jose Alvarenga did not return to Mexico. He had been living there illegally for many years, using forged documents, and he was facing time there.